Hello and welcome back to the Cheeky Science Show. So in this video, I thought I would share with you some key lessons that I've learned from the week 1 of my PhD so far. So a few weeks ago, I posted a video on how I was preparing for my PhD. Well, I have officially started the journey and have learnt quite a lot, mainly unrelated to my main project so far, that I know is really useful information. So I have decided to make a video to share these tips that I've gained so that you watching can benefit, but kind of also for my own benefit, since I feel like I'm likely to forget most of these important lessons that I've learned so far. So I've very broadly split these lessons into 2 categories: getting organised and then adding to the apps that I mentioned about in the previous video and the apps I've already been using. So firstly, getting organised. Very vague title, I know. So in the previous video that I made, I think I spoke about the importance of labelling and making sure I could keep track of my different samples and staying on top of things. But this first week has introduced me to new concepts that I think are also going to be really important and I didn't even think about when I made the first video. So this comes under the umbrella of strategic planning. And so this includes planning of the experimental design, the questions you're trying to address, the aims, the hypothesis, and the experiment itself. And then once you've got the experiment in mind, to check, do I have all the reagents that I need? Are these reagents that I can get available to myself if I don't have them? And then can I book the equipment that I'm going to use? And do all of this before you just jump into the experiment. So a lot of these tips has come from this Nature review article, which I actually really highly recommend that you read it. It's quite funny, but also quite serious and actually a little bit scary. But it just raises some really important points, and I'll try and summarize the majority of these main points in this video. But yeah, you should definitely read it, I recommend. And so just for example, one of the first points it makes is that we are often taught as scientists to be asking the right question, but to be able to ask the right question, we also need to be getting high quality data that actually answers the question. And that is also important and should be taken into account. The key thing being, do you trust your data? And so if you were unsure of this and how to go about asking the right question and setting up your experiments correctly, the key other lesson that I've learnt is to be friendly. Smile and make friends with people who you're working with. Although it's often thought that scientists are locked up away from the community, that just isn't the case, and we are a community of our own. We work together as teams, we collaborate, but also you should be suspect of your peers. Do you trust them? So one quote that I picked up from this Nature review article is, "In God we trust, everybody else must show controls." And this kind of links to my next point about risk assessment, and risk assessment in terms of how much we can trust the various elements of our certain experiments in a given circumstance. And so it's like, if something's gone wrong, is it because there's something wrong with the reagents, the protocol isn't the right protocol, or it's, do you believe that if you add this protein and this event happens, is that the case? Is that the right cell line that you've been given? Should you check? Yes, probably be a good idea. That's what I've learned. So it's more about being cautious than to just go around judging everyone and not believing anyone. To be aware of it. And so, as this quote states, it's true. 70%, well, probably not exactly 70%, but a decent proportion of how well your experiment goes depends on how well you plan it. And how well you plan it also comes under this idea of risk assessment and how, time is precious. And if you can take the time to really carefully write down experimental details, check you've got reactions, check you have got the right cell line, for example, could save you so much time later on when something does go wrong. So now on to the more data collection side of things. A key lesson I've learned is the importance of having tidy data. And so one of the key take-home messages that we were taught about is the idea of separating your metadata from your data when creating data files and inputting your data, because it makes it easier to work with. And so metadata refers to the set of data that describes and gives information about other data. So this could be like the name of your cell line and additional information such as where the cell line came from, what mutations are present, stuff like that. I don't really know. It depends on what the data is, of course. And so by separating your metadata from your data, you avoid the use of so-called wide data and instead create probably more tables, but longer tables that are thinner. And these tables are easier to then import into other applications to analyze your data. And so that's the perks or slash benefit, or the reason why you should want to do this. And so I didn't really know why I put this in the video again, but yeah, this is the key difference between what metadata and data is. So data is your actual experimental values. So I have already slightly mentioned this, but how and why is separating this metadata from data so important for data input? Well, just before I answer this question, as we've now moved on to adding to the apps, the apps I spoke about in the previous video, I wanted to introduce you to an app that I found pretty useful so far, and it's called Notion. So Notion is another note-taking project managing app, which the producers describe as the all-in-one workspace. So think of it like Evernote, Trello, OneNote combined. And so far, I've even used Notion to make the script for this video. Yep, that's right. I actually do try and plan what I'm going to say before I record it. Well, sometimes. But I'm very much a novice at using Notion so far. So if you want to have a better introduction to Notion from a pro Notion user, then check out this video by Thomas Frank, where he shows you how he uses it for his own projects. And I don't know, I think that Notion could just be a really cool and good tool for organising PhD notes, so different projects, also personal life and I know other stuff. And it syncs between different devices. So far I've not reached like a limited max number of computers or devices I can have it on. Not that I have that many anyway. But yeah, it's just been pretty cool, so I suggest you check it out. But one app that I did mention last time was RStudio. So one of the introduction sessions that I had was a brief intro to bioinformatics. And one thing that is true for myself, but what many other people also said, is that they have dabbled in R so far. And that rhymed. And that wasn't scripted. But it's true, my eyes have now been opened to much more of what R can actually do. And so I already knew about the different packages that come along with RStudio, such as ggplot2, which I have used for making gorgeous figures. But there is this thing called Tidyverse, and not gonna lie, I don't really know its full potential yet, but apparently now is a good time to understand how it works and to get familiar with using for coding in R, because it's just a really useful way to analyze your data. And you can also have this thing called Shiny Apps and R Markdown for making PDFs with your R scripts. So, an introduction to what R is for those unsure. It is effectively a programming software that enables you to load in your data and plot graphs, draw analyses from your results, and probably much more, because I am still definitely a novice in using R. But we shall fear not. And look, there's my script. Because there is a free online introduction to R and how to use it. And so I will be slowly making my way through this. And from what I've read so far, it actually ties back into what I was saying earlier about having tidy data. And so I quite like this flowchart where they display and emphasize the importance on understanding your data, and that no matter how many times you go around this loop, you need to do the understanding before you try to report and communicate your results. And so another app, which I don't think really counts as an app, that can also help you tidy your data, is called Open Refine, and it's something I've literally never come across before. And so I can't really say too much. I've barely looked into it myself, but it's a way that you can kind of merge and like modify your data sets to get it from that wide data sets that I was talking about into those long and thin data sets, which you can then more easily import into things like R. And so another software, I'll call them software now, that I've been introduced to that I'd never heard of before is Lab Archives, which is a kind of one platform for having an online e-lab book. And so it's more than just tracking your daily lab life. You can add photos, you can add protocols, and you can also share them with people and do much more of it. Again, I haven't really looked into it, but I think it could be useful, so you should check it out. And so the likelihood is that I've forgotten something, but for 1 week I think I've been witness to many key take-home messages to keep on the top of my mind throughout my PhD and beyond. So the aim of this video was to spread this advice, so I hope that you have found some of this useful, and definitely check out that Nature Review paper. And yeah, I just hope this was valuable information. Thanks for listening.